Pokénerds, my name is Roxox and this is my attempt at a Nuzlocke run of Pokemon Leaf Green. For those of you who don't know, a Nuzlocke is where you play the game with a specific set of rules to make it a little more challenging and interesting. The main two rules of a Nuzlocke are that you are only allowed to catch the first Pokemon you encounter in each new area, and if your Pokemon faints, you either need to permanently box it or release it. There are a lot of variations of additional rules that people play by. These are the ones that I use. Number 1, I play by species clause, meaning that I am only allowed to have one Pokemon of each evolutionary line. Number 2, if I get a Pokemon as part of a storyline, it does not count as my encounter for that area, but I am still allowed to use it. Number 3, I play with the battle mode on set. Number 4, I am not allowed to use any items on my Pokemon during battle. And number 5, I have a level cap that is determined by the next gym leader's ace Pokemon or the last Elite 4 member's ace Pokemon. So yeah, now that I've explained the rules, let's get into the story. My adventure begins in Pallet Town, where my neighbor Professor Oak decides to give his grandson Gary and I our first Pokemon. Now, Gary and I have a bit of a strange relationship. We are both best friends and arch enemies. It's weird, but it is what it is. Anyways, Professor Oak has 3 Pokemon for us to choose from, and I'm allowed to pick first. So I make a beeline for the Charmander, because who wouldn't want a fire-breathing dragon on their team? However, I want to become a trainer so that I can take on the Pokemon League, and the closest gym to me specializes in rock-type Pokemon, so a little fire salamander probably isn't going to be the best matchup. And so I turn my attention to the Squirtle. He'll definitely be helpful against a rock-type gym, and he looks like a pretty sturdy Pokemon. However, before I choose him, I notice the third potential starter, the Bulbasaur. He looks really timid and insecure, and his bulb is a bit dry and wilted, but he just looks so eager to be chosen, so I decide to choose him and give him the nickname Victor. Gary decides to choose the Charmander as his starter, and as I'm heading out to show my mom my new Pokemon, he stops me and challenges me to a Pokemon battle. Of course I agree, but I instantly regretted it when I realized that Victor is kinda terrified of this Charmander. He barely put any strength into his attacks, and it really wasn't looking good for him. At least not until he tripped over his little legs and tackled the Charmander at full force. That swung things around in our favor, and we were able to win our first ever Pokemon battle. Before leaving the lab, Professor Oak gave Gary and I some Pokeballs and a Pokedex each to help him out in his research. Of course, Gary decided it had to be a race to fill in the Pokedex and ran off ahead of me, saying that he's gonna get a map from his sister and he'll tell her not to give me one. Which translates to, by the way, Daisy has a map for you, go get it before you leave. Like I said, we have a strange relationship. After getting the map from Daisy, Victor and I go to Route 1 just outside of Pallet Town, where we encounter a Pidgey. Knowing that I'll need a variety of Pokemon to achieve my dream, I decide to catch him and name him Kago. Since Kago is still just a little baby bird, I decide to stick around Route 1 for a while to train him up, and also to give Victor some practice with battling. Eventually he's able to deal out intentional critical hits, and I decide that maybe it's time for a bit more of a challenge. So we head off to the side of Viridian to Route 22, where we encounter a Mankey. Unfortunately, the jump from Rattata and Pidgey to a Mankey was a bit too much for Victor, and he kind of froze up in fear a little. He did shake it off after a minute, but I realized that maybe he's not quite ready to handle a gym by himself, and a Mankey would actually be pretty helpful against a rock-type gym. So, despite him putting up quite a fight and breaking one of my Pokeballs, we did catch the Mankey and I named him Katjan. Since Victor was still very nervous about battling, I decided to take him to Route 2 to find some Caterpie to fight against. Cause, let's be real, no one is intimidated by a Caterpie. However, we ended up finding a tiny little Rattata, and even Katjan couldn't bring himself to attack with full force against her, so I decided to catch her and named her Nezuko. After doing some training on Route 2, we headed back to Route 22 and ran into Gary, who of course wanted to battle. Now, Nezuko never actually took on a battle by herself during training because her brothers wanted to protect her. But being the adamant little child she is, she wanted to prove herself and stepped up to fight against Gary. And right away she outsped and landed a critical hit on Gary's newly caught Pidgey. Since since she clearly didn't need any help, I decided to leave her in against Gary's Charmander too, and even though it took a bit longer, she was able to knock it out all by herself, proving that even though she's the baby sister of the group, she doesn't need anyone protecting her. It seems like Gary is also interested in taking on the Pokemon League now, so I figured it's time that we head over to get our first gym badge in Pewter City. However, in order to get there, we need to pass through Viridian Forest. As soon as we entered the forest, I heard a weird noise and went over to investigate, and the source of it turned out to be a little Weedle who was trying to imitate the buzzing of a Beedrill. He seemed really eager to battle as soon as he saw me, and actually poisoned Kago right away. I really liked his fighting spirit and the little buzzing he was making, so I caught him and named him Bazby, and thanks to Kago, who was more than eager to help toughen him up, by the time we left the forest, Bazby had fully evolved into a buzzing Beedrill. Once out of Viridian Forest, we had finally arrived in Pewter City. I always wanted to come here to visit the museum, but the excitement of taking on a gym for the first time kinda made me forget about that. So the plan for the gym was to Viktor to fight against any trainers and Kachan to handle the gym leader, and luckily for Viktor, there was only one trainer for him to fight against. Viktor managed to one-shot our opponent's Geodude, and the Sandshrew was a little bulkier, so it took 2 Vine Whips to knock it out. With the trainer out of the way, it was time to face against my first ever gym leader, Brock, who also led with the Geodude. Kachan made quick work of it, but then came out the real challenge, Brock's Onix, who absolutely towered over Kachan. Completely unfazed by the size difference though, Kachan summoned all of his strength and landed a critical hit low kick, which easily knocked out the giant rock snake, thereby winning us the Boulder Badge. In commemoration of winning my first ever gym badge, Brock also gave me the TM for the move Rock Tomb. I don't have anyone to use it on yet, but hopefully I will soon. Fueled with the adrenaline of winning our first ever gym badge, I was eager to head off to the next gym right away, and ended up forgetting about the museum again. Just before I made my way out of Pewter though, I met up with one of Professor Oak's aides who had a gift for me from my mother, a new pair of running shoes. And so with the new speed in my step and 5 amazing Pokemon, we raced off to find our next challenge.